Testing, testing. Testing, testing. So testing, testing. Yep, we're good. I know. You weren't supposed to hear that. Suggestion. See, where's Doug? He's running late. I'm sure you did, Mud. I was pretty bad. I was like, oh, I hope that didn't come off. Then I heard, oh, I actually stopped and restarted to record. But exactly. Six p.m. Eastern. Exactly. One apart. Exactly. I'm gonna show you guys some. See if this comes across. See that little guy? Hi, baby. Such a good boy. You want to hang out with me for a Constitution class? Say hi. Wyatt. His name is Wyatt. I have 5 right now. Come here, guys. Mr. Gibbs. Mr. Gibbs.
Yes, sir.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
How are you?
I was going to joke and say, are you at a restaurant? No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. That cat from this angle almost looks like a skunk. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah. This is Wyatt. Say hi, Wyatt. He's hilarious.
I'm sure he is.
You know how I love cats.
And you know how I don't.
Well, nobody's perfect.
Yeah. But cats, Dodgers, man, you got all kinds of flaws. All right. It's good to see you. Hi, everybody. For those of you who are already live, it's good to see you. Yeah. You know, I sat down at my desk about an hour ago, grabbed something to eat, sitting here, and then I'm, like moving things out of my truck because I'm going to have 2 people riding with me to San Juan Capistrano today. And speaking of dogs and cats, and not that I'm trying to put points in your favor of what you appreciate about cats, but doggies, you have to let them outside regularly, or because they got to go potty, and they haven't figured out how to use boxes and things like that with the stuff I normally use to soak up oil spills. And my dog, I guess he's been stuck in the house most of the day, cocks his leg in the middle of the dining room, and he's looking straight at me as he's doing it.
Huh.
I'm like, you little jerk. And I'm sure this is what happens if you don't let me out, kind of attitude. But it's like, you jerk, man. You look at me right in the eye as he's doing the deed on my dining room floor. Luckily, we have tile, but it's a few rolls of towels, paper towels.
I don't have to deal with that.
Yeah. So, and he knows better.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, he does.
No, he doesn't.
Matter of fact, these dogs.
If he knows better, he wouldn't have done it.
No, he does know better. He did it out of. He was acting like a cat. Is what he was doing. He's acting defiant.
Cats use a box.
Yeah, damn.
It's hilarious because these guys are like at 7 weeks old, they like get in the box and they literally they it's instinctive. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about not that I'm one cat fan, but if you go on vacation, it's real easy. You leave out some food, you make sure the cat box is empty and clean, and come back, and things are pretty much the same. Dog, you got to find someone to watch them or take them or something. They're like having kids.
Maybe.
I mean the dogs.
I knew you meant. I'm not stupid.
New shirt, by the way.
Hey, we kind of match.
Yeah.
My shirt.
Yeah.
The cure for pedophilia.
Hangman's noose. That's pretty good.
That's one way. I still favor.
That's way too merciful.
I still favor impalement.
I still favor hanging them by their testicles until they,
Well, that's assuming they're a man.
Yeah, this is true.
Anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about the Constitution.
Oh, there's supposed to be a class we're supposed to be doing, huh?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, we don't want this show to become like the Corona class. All right, hi everybody.
No, that would be amazing.
That would be amazing. Ron, that's how I met Ron, by the way. It was originally Constitution class at Corona, right?
We met at the gun show. We met at the gun show. That's how I knew who you were. So we met at the gun show.
Yeah, but I didn't remember who the hell you were.
Okay.
So in my mind, I met you at the class. That's right, though. I remember when you met me at the class, you're like, dude, I met you at the gun show. I'm like, really? I didn't remember you. You remember me.
I used to get all your emails. And then when I showed up at the thing, because I didn't come to see you, I came to see Trevor Loudon that night.
Yeah, that's right. Now that I remember. Okay. Trevor Loudon working on Enemies Within the Church right now.
Yes.
It's in post-production.
Good. I'm eager to see that.
We are going to screen it at the Fallbrook Mission Theater.
Really?
Once it comes out. Yes. And he'll be there.
Please let me know. I want to see that. I want to be there for that.
Absolutely. By the way, speaking of the Mission Theater in Fallbrook, I'm speaking there this Friday at 10 a.m. Now, I know they want you to RSVP, but I don't think they'll throw you out if you don't. But if you do want to RSVP, just get a hold of me, Constitution Speaker at yahoo.com, and I'll get you to the right people. And I'm still trying to catch up on most of my email. Constitution Speaker and my Reagan addresses are caught up. The other one, Douglas V. Gibbs at Yahoo, which is where if you filled out that contact thing, that's where those emails go. I'm still like 4 weeks behind on that one. So if you haven't received a response on those, I'm still working on it. Yeah, every once in a while I do this thing called sleep. Last night I think I got about 4 hours.
What's that?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, we're in Amendment 12. We're going to wrap up Amendment 12 today. Then we're going to get into the Reconstruction amendments. And last week I wound up doing a video when we talked about how the ballots are supposed to be separate for president and vice president. And I didn't realize that was such a big deal to people. Because you got to remember, as a constitutionalist, a lot of this stuff is just, it's my common knowledge. And I forget that there are certain items that sometimes people go, whoa, what would say that again? I'm not, and so thank you, Ron, for alerting me to the importance of that little tidbit. And to the audience there that watches these videos, because you're supposed to be able to have a choice. You don't have to take who the president picks. You're not, or whoever's voting, elector is really supposed to be voting, but it's supposed to be separate ballots. It says so right in the Amendment 12. All right, now, what we're going to read next harkens back to January 6th, not the fake insurrection garbage, what was going on inside. When a lot of people are very angry with our vice president, Mr. Pence, thinking he didn't do his job. And I'm not as angry as everybody else at him because I know what his job is. And so we're going to talk about that. Don't hate me. Give me a chance to explain. Sometimes people get upset at me because they're like, no, just let me say it, and then we could duke it out later. All right, so we are about a third of the way into Amendment 12. And if you remember, we left off at the part where the electors have voted for president and vice president on separate ballots, and they send it to the Senate. So I'm going to start reading a little bit back where we left off, just so everybody can catch up. And so let's see. Let's. I almost feel like starting at the beginning. I am, just so everybody keeps up, so everybody knows where I'm starting. So the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. Once again, they didn't want the states with the highest populations just, picking their own people. So one of the persons that they voted for had to be from a state other than the state they were from. They shall name in their ballots.
The vice president. Did I hear you? So for
either the president or the vice president, they can vote for at least one. See that, because remember, they're doing 2 ballots: one for president, one for vice president. One of whom can't be from the same state they are.
Okay, that's what I thought. Just making sure.
Okay,
making sure I understood that.
Yeah, because once again, it's like, New York and Pennsylvania and Virginia were the most populous states at the time, and they didn't want them controlling all the elections by just putting their people in every time. So they couldn't vote for both people being from their states. They had to at least have one of them being from a different state than their own. All right. Then it continues, they shall name in their ballots, plural, the person voted for as president, and in distinct ballots, the person voted for as vice president. It goes back to what we were talking about last week. And they shall make distinct lists of all persons voted for as president and of all persons voted for as vice president, and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify. The electors, or the states, the electors, they're certifying it. And then transmit sealed to the seat of government of the United States, directed to the president of the Senate. So the electors votes. After they vote, they certify that that's what it is. They seal it. They send it to the president of the Senate, which is the vice president of the United States. The president of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate, and the House of Representatives, both houses are present, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. That's the end of basically the vice president's role, to count the votes. The vice president didn't have the authority to say, oh, I'm decertifying these or I don't accept these. He's there to lead the effort of counting the votes. That's it. Now, that said, and he knew that. He said so when people were calling on him to reject. He says, hey, I don't have that authority constitutionally. And he was right. Now, that said, he could have at least said, you know what? I think this stuff's bogus. States, you sure this is what you want to send me? He could have at least said something, drawn attention to it. So I'm with you, but I'm not angry at Pence saying, oh, I reject him. He didn't have that authority. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president if if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. So having the most votes is not enough, has to be a majority. That goes back to our electoral college, 270 to win. 270 is the majority.
I want to ask a question about that. When
Sure.
has it been 270 as long as there've been 50 states, or when does the 270 change, or is it like, I mean, if there was a 51st state added, would there be
Yes, because now they would have, let's say they're not a very populated state. Let's say they're like Rhode Island. So they have one member of the House and 2 senators. Let's say it's Washington, D.C. And so that would be 3 electoral votes. So then the total number, whatever 269 times 2 is, would go up by 3, and then it would be half plus 1 of whatever that is. So it would probably go up to like 272 or something like that.
So how do they determine if there was a new state that came in? Let's say that was I'm just going to speak theoretically. Let's just say Mexico. Let's say we annex Mexico and Mexico comes in as its own state. All right. Well, Mexico's got an enormous population. Would it be based on the population of Mexico as how many electors came in?
Well, okay, let's back up a little bit, because there's 2 problems in what we're talking about. Okay, the first thing is this. The electoral votes, if you remember, are based on how many representatives you have in the House plus your 2 senators.
Correct.
Whatever that number is. Your number of representatives is based on your population. Okay.
Right,
now,
right.
That said, in the early 1900s, I don't remember the date. I don't remember who was president. I just remember there was a piece of legislation that did this. They froze the maximum number of members of the House.
Okay, that's kind of
now that's our weird caveat. So if that had not happened, the number of members of the House would go bigger, the number of electoral votes would get bigger, so on and so forth. The problem is we have now this, we're going to max it out at 535, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And so therefore, or 435, I'm sorry, it's 535 with the Senate. Yeah, so it's 435. So we're going to max it at 435. There cannot be any more than that. So then what's going to happen if a new state comes in? Well, it's going to be based on percentages then, right? And which means that somebody's going to lose representation so that the new state, whatever state it may be, is going to get representation. But had they not have frozen the number, then it would have been based on, okay, we're giving 1 per every so many people, so therefore they're due, let's say 6. But since that number is frozen,
you answered my question. You answered my question when you said it was frozen.
Yeah, but it was frozen, and now here's the question. And not that I don't necessarily agree or disagree with freezing the number. I'm not going to get into that. I just have one simple question. Where in the Constitution does it give Congress the authority to freeze that number?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. So technically what they've done is unconstitutional. Now, that said, I understand why they did it, because at the rate we were going, I mean, we could wind up with tens of thousands of representatives, if we didn't freeze the number, right? Because population keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And
right.
Then there's another caveat here. 12 amendments were sent to the states for ratification when it came to the Bill of Rights. 10 came back ratified. That our Bill of Rights. And the 11th one, or an 11th one, well, whatever, however you want to say it, was ratified in 1992 and became the 27th Amendment. So actually, of the original 12 amendments sent to the states to be the Bill of Rights, 11 of them got ratified. 10 immediately, and then one later became 27th Amendment. That last amendment that never got ratified, that's part of the Bill of Rights. And by the way, there was no time limit on it. It can still be ratified if 3/4 of the existing states decide to ratify it. Requires one member of the House for every 30,000. Now, if that ever got ratified, this freeze doesn't matter, number one. Number two, and I don't know if you want to pull out a calculator.
I'm going to do that right now.
Take the total population of the United States and divide it by 30,000, and you're going to get the number of members of the House of Representatives.
What are we, 350 million?
Let's just say that for argument's sake, because I don't want to sit there looking for it. So 350 million divided by 30,000. How many members of the House of Representatives would we have?
It's 11,666.
11,666. Well, that's an interesting number, but anyway, hey, it's politics. That number always pops up. But anyway, so now here's my question, audience. Would you feel comfortable with 11,666 members of the House? There are actually people who are suggesting that should happen. Not because they think it's good to have such a large bureaucracy, but because they think, well, gosh, if the person's only representing 30,000, they'll be more answerable to their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And when they say that, my first response is, if that's the case, how do you explain city council members?
Good point.
They have very small populations. They're in charge, and we know what they're about. If anything, they're worse than Congress critters sometimes. So I hope that last amendment never gets ratified. And I would even, if there was a Article 5 convention, I might even suggest proposing an amendment to make sure it never does. Now, that said, I'd hate to bring attention to it also. Maybe it hasn't because nobody thinks about it, the fact that it exists. But nonetheless, but whatever the number of electoral votes, which is the number of members of the House plus your 2 senators, each state, that's why we have 535 electoral votes. Okay, that's what it is. So I believe that's right. So let me pull out my calculator real quick.
No, that's right. It's 270 because you need 270 to win.
Yeah.
So 27 and 27. What are you doing?
Oops, wrong button. Okay, so you got 535 divided by let's see, divided by 2 equals 267.5, which is 268 too. So that's about half. That's why they say 270 to win.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so anyway, so get back to what we're reading. So the president having the greatest number of, or the person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president if such a number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3 on the list, because remember, there was not just 2 major parties. There was a lot of candidates that were running back then. You would have 5, 6 candidates that were all taking a good share of electoral votes. And we're not talking a Green Party guy who gets, 1.2% of the vote. I mean, we're talking, some guys who were getting a good share of the votes that weren't a part of the Federalist Party or a part of the Jeffersonian Republicans. So then from the persons having the highest numbers not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. So if for some reason nobody gets to 270 in today's terms, nobody gets that majority, it goes to the House, and then the House would vote for president, but not by number of members, by state. Each state gets 1 vote. Now, had there been a question about this last election, and let's say 3 states did certify their votes, their electoral votes, and it dropped Mr. Biden below 270, then this is the way they would have had to have done it. Straight to the House, House votes for president, person having the most votes based on 1 vote per state. So you have to have still the most states in your favor, not necessarily. So notice how the founders are doing everything they can to get away from popular votes. Don't want a national popular vote. Don't even want a popular vote in the House. It's by state.
All right, now I'm going to ask a question that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering is, what if some of these audits cause states to decertify?
And my argument has been then that would put the number being held by the candidates both below 270. If 3 or more of these battleground states that are in question were to decertify their votes, and then Congress, or actually, let me back up there, this House of Representatives would then immediately need to vote for president based on the candidates that were on the ballot. Now, since it's by state, there's no doubt in my mind that Trump would get the most states, and then Trump would become president again. Now, that said, there's questions about that method, if that's really the way it should go down. Some people say it should be a revote. Some people say it should just nullify the election, start all over with a new election. What do you do in the meantime? Let Kamala be president?
Well, I think that's the if we're going to go back to Team 17 for purposes of this video, I think when they talked about military was the only way, I have an idea that they would probably put the military come in and do a martial law scenario, and then revote everybody, because the whole system has been corrupt for however long it's been corrupt. Now, is that what's going to happen? I don't know. I'm just
from a constitutional manner, the military has no business getting involved. That said, since when do things follow the Constitution of late?
Well, the Civil War, Lincoln didn't have any constitutional authority to use the military.
Not in the way he did, no.
In the way he did.
Or suspend habeas corpus. There's all kinds of, and like I was telling my class this morning, I don't call it the Civil War. Civil War is a war between 2 entities within the same body. The states had seceded, so it wasn't a civil war. No, it was a war between the states. A civil war
is 2 factions striving for power over the same entity.
Right.
That's a civil war, and that's not what was going on.
Right. You had the states that left. So you had states still in the Union, states not in the Union going at it.
The South struggle was for independent governance.
Now,
not for trying to control Washington, D.C.
Now, the point I was going to get to is this. Some people call it the Civil War. I call it the war between the states, but the people in the South, they don't call it either. To them, it's the war of Northern aggression.
Yeah, agreed. Or the war to prevent Southern independence. And yes, Matthew, yes, the war manual. That's I haven't looked at that as closely. It's been a while since I looked at that, but yes.
What was his comment?
What Matthew's talking about. Are you familiar with the law of war? There was if you look at the 17 drops, there's been some deep dives not in the fairly recent future where a lot of the numbers that we presumed were dates were actually sections within the law of war manual, and very, very interesting things to pop up. So anyway, but Matthew's on point there. Anyway, that's way off topic.
Yeah, it is, but it is fascinating to know, and it does sort of tie in the sense of the situation we're in. All right, let's continue. But in choosing the president, the vote shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. So in other words, we have to have at least 2/3 of folks from the states, 2/3, in other words, of the states being represented, present. Then in brackets, which means this is no longer in play, it says, and if the House of Representatives shall not choose a president whenever the right of choice shall devolve upon them before the 4th day of March next following, then the vice president shall act as president, as in the case of the death or other constitutional disability of the president. In this case, no, they just keep picking, and they got rid of that. And basically, they're supposed to, the 20th Amendment basically says they gotta keep trying until it happens. Now, that said, the person having the greatest number of votes as vice president, once again, separate election, shall be the vice president. And if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person have a majority, then from the 2 highest numbers on the list, the Senate shall choose the vice president. So the House chooses the president, Senate chooses the vice president. Why is the Senate choosing the vice president? They're choosing their own president of the Senate. A quorum for the purpose shall consist of 2/3 of the whole number of senators, and a majority of the whole number shall be necessary to a choice. Same thing as with the president. But no person, now this is the interesting one. This ties into my case against Kamala Harris through the Constitution Association, because remember, originally in Article 2, it had in the election, the top 2 presidential candidates taking president and vice president. Now that there's 2 separate elections, one for president, one for vice president, the question came up, well, gosh, if the president didn't run for president, if the vice president didn't run for president, do they need to be eligible for president? So they added this. But no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. So since vice president is no longer a person that was running for president, they wanted to make sure that question was answered. So now that tells us, well, then Kamala Harris has to be eligible to be president, even as vice president. Right. In other words, she has to be a natural born citizen. Go back to Article 2, natural born citizen. Natural born citizen requires that both parents are citizens at the time of birth. Both the president and the vice president must be a natural born citizen. No other office in the United States or state government has that requirement. Some may have a requirement of being a citizen, but none, well, they all should have a requirement of a citizen, but none require, other than vice president, president, natural born citizen. That's important to know. All right, so that is the end of the 12th Amendment. We're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to start the Reconstruction Amendments, but I want to kind of give you a scenario here with the war between the states before I start reading. We are told, and we believe, that the war between the states was about slavery. That began about slavery. It was always about slavery because, you know, those racist white people. And here's the problem. That's not true. While definitely slavery is an ingredient, there would not be a division between the northern states and southern states politically if it wasn't for slavery. So slavery was an ingredient to it all. The main reason why the southern states said we're out of here was not because of slavery directly, but because of the Constitution and their perception of what their rights as states were: states' rights, state sovereignty, state choice to make their own decision. Here's the thing about liberty, and you could tie this to a lot of things. Liberty is the freedom to say no. Liberty is the freedom to say no, be it to a mask, a vaccine, or to the dictatorial expectations of a federal government, of which the southern states said, that's it, we're out of here. We say no. We do not like the fact that Dred Scott and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 are not being followed. That the northern states are ignoring the law, ignoring the Constitution, and the federal government's not enforcing it. So we're out of here. On top of that, while we're already upset because of that, and because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which got rid of the Missouri Compromise, which pretty much was designed to keep the House pretty even. In other words, the Missouri Compromise of 1830 required that if a slave state came into the Union, a free state had to. If a free state did, then a slave state had to. Maine and Missouri was the original situation. Maine was actually created to make sure there was a slave or a free state, to join the Union.
Isn't that what you were telling me why the Yucatan wasn't allowed to?
Yeah, Yucatan Peninsula applied for statehood, but they couldn't because basically, according to the Missouri Compromise, not only did one slave state and one free state have to come in at the same time, but also if the state was south of the Missouri southern border, they would have to come in as a slave state.
So, guys,
but the Kansas-Nebraska Compromise or Act, actually, Kansas-Nebraska Act got rid of all that.
So a lot of people probably didn't realize what you just said. The Yucatan Peninsula down in Mexico applied for statehood in the United States.
Yeah, during the early parts of the Mexican-American War.
Right.
Yeah.
Just
wouldn't that be great? Hey, I'm going to Cancun, but I don't need a passport. It's just another state.
Right. Interesting. I didn't know that. That's something I found out recently.
Yeah. It's a very interesting part of history, and it takes a lot of the argument by the other side and just puts it on its head. But anyway, so now, have you ever heard of Bleeding Kansas?
Yes.
Bleeding Kansas, what had happened is when the Kansas-Nebraska Act happened, what it basically said is it was up to a state to decide whether or not it's going to be a slave state. Whether it was north of that line or south of that line, it's up to the state to make that decision. And there were pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces in Kansas when Kansas was, ready to become a state. And it literally became the killing fields in the cornfields. Well, maybe it wasn't cornfields just yet, but it became like the killing fields, man. Bleeding Kansas is the nickname of what went on.
Those two forces, there was two forces that were fighting for control of Kansas, of whether it was going to be a free or a slave state.
Right. Exactly. And so this is a huge issue. And meanwhile, the southern states are like, you know what? See what this is causing? See what you just did is causing people dying. And you're basically taking away our lifestyle of our economic, because see, economically, the North manufacturing industry, slaves are not, they're good. But because the South was agricultural, they believed they needed the slave trade in order to continue their lifestyle and in order for their economies to continue to run. Now, that said, this idea that everybody in the South owned slaves is ridiculous. Less than 5% of free whites in the South own slaves.
Only 1%. It was 1%.
No, that's countrywide. It was 1.9%. I'm sorry, 1.7% nationwide. But in the South alone, it was 4.9%. Okay. But you're right when it comes to the country. So, and then on top of that, there were, a lot of people don't know this, there were free Black people in the South. And 27% of them owned slaves. I can even get something better. Matter of fact, I've put a little video on my site not too long ago about this. The first slaves in America were white. It was indentured servitude, but it was basically slavery. So, there's all kinds of historical facts that just, tips the left on their head. And then the first official slave owner on record, Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown was a black man, and he owned 2 black slaves and 1 white slave. And he's the first one on record in the colonies to be a slave owner. So once again, there's a lot of history that we're not being told. Now, I bring all of this up because we're approaching the 13th Amendment, the war between the states, and we'll talk about all that. So we've got this situation where the southern states are ticked off. They don't believe the laws being followed. And then on top of that,
which 13th Amendment?
Oh, I hate, you know what? All right, let's mention this for a moment. I thought I talked about it in Article 1, Section 9, but I can't show you the picture, but I can read it. A friend of mine actually has a book with the 13 amendments that was published in 1825. So it's now not something I've just heard of. I've actually seen it. The original 13th Amendment, and I was corrected about my dates not too long ago too by someone who was better in the know on this topic, was ratified in 1811.
Really?
But the records of the ratification got lost. So it wasn't until 1819 that we see paperwork showing for sure that Virginia had accepted it. That's the reason why a lot of people use 1819. But it was actually ratified in 1811. And the original 13th Amendment vanished right around 1864, 1865, just a year or two before the ratification of the new 13th Amendment. Isn't that interesting? And where I have seen the print of it was from a book called Military Law of the United States, Washington, Edward D. Graft printer, 1825 is the book. And here's what it reads in the 13th Amendment in that book. Darn it, come on.
Let me say this plainly, guys. What we're saying is that we had a 13th Amendment that was ratified a long time ago that
vanished,
disappeared.
And we didn't know about it till 1983, and I'll tell you that story in a minute.
Right.
So here's what it read. Now, if you remember Article 1, Section 9, real quick side note, Article 1, Section 9, very last clause says that politicians cannot have a title from a foreign government, nor receive money from foreign governments. Okay, now this is the 13th Amendment before the 13th Amendment, the one that was ratified in 1811 and vanished 1864 or so. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind, whatever, from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States, and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them. Well, if you're not a citizen, you can't hold office. Now, a lot of people have told me, oh gosh, then it says that lawyers can't hold office. No, it says that if lawyers are not willing to give up their connection to those foreign entities, they can't hold office. But that's the original 13th Amendment. We didn't even know about it until 1983. 1983, there was some historians who were rummaging through historical papers in a state house in Maine, and they came across a book similar to the one my friend has, which, by the way, my friend paid $2,300 for that book.
Wow.
Hey, man, you're a better man than I, brother, because I love history, but I ain't spending $2,300 on a book.
Right.
I spent over $100 on a book a few times, but $2,300, I don't think so. But anyway, so they find a book like that one, and it's got the Constitution printed in it, and it's got this 13th Amendment. And I'm like, whoa, what's this? There should only be 12 amendments. As they went through other state houses in other states, they came across other books, not just the same book, that also had the Constitution printed in them, and they had this 13th Amendment. Most of them were from the 1820s and 1830s, most of these books. How is it that there's this 13th Amendment that everybody's convinced existed, but yet we know nothing about it? So they went to the federal archives, the federal records, to look it up. There was no record whatsoever of that 13th Amendment ever existing. You talk about a scrub job.
So I guess the point that we're making here is we talk about how the deep state and the country is corrupt and all this other stuff.
Yeah, it's nothing new.
There's nothing new under the sun. If the federal government was able to scrub an amendment out of the Constitution and make it so that it never existed, think about that. That's pretty significant.
Now,
that's not something that can just be done lightly. I mean, that's like,
so they've got all this evidence that it existed, and they eventually find records of different houses of certain states showing when it was ratified, the whole bit. They start finding the records in the state houses, though, not through the federal records.
Right.
And it was old historical papers that have been forgotten, just stuck in, I almost imagine it like the end of the movie at Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's a big giant room with all these boxes, and here's a box. Does it have the records? Yeah. I mean, that's how I almost feel like it was like, right?
Right.
So now here's the question. Based on the language of that amendment, and if you guys want me to go over it again, I'll read it again. If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument, that be salary or money like a salary, of any kind, well, it doesn't have to be a salary, emolument could be monies received, of any kind, whatever, from any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them, the states, or either of them. Once again, the states, the them is the states. So now we have to ask ourselves, who would be the ones who would most likely lose in that situation? Well, let's back up a little bit.
Lawyers.
So we don't want any titles or money or connection to Europe. That's really what it's coming down to. Now, that would mean also you can't be a member of foreign organizations. Anybody ever heard of the Bar Association, the American Bar Association? The American Bar Association is connected to the International Bar Association. Do you know what the BAR in bar stands for in Bar Association? British Accreditation Registry. So if you're a lawyer and you're a member of that organization, if you want to, in that amendments in place, if you want to keep your citizenship, you need to leave the bar. Well, then how are you going to practice law? America was supposed to have its own separate entity for registering their lawyers. But this one's connected to Europe. So lawyers stand to lose quite a bit. And guess what? They're also making money with foreign monies and so on and so forth. But who else on top of lawyers would also stand to lose, not taking monies from foreign governments and things like that?
Politicians.
Politicians and bankers.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy Trinity. Bankers, politicians, and lawyers. The Holy Trinity.
It's not difficult to see how easy something like that could get scrubbed out of the record. Well, we do not want that to happen.
When the politicians, the lawyers, and the bankers go, whoa, we don't want that. Well, who's keeping all the records? The politicians, the bankers, and their lawyers. So they made a whole amendment
disappear.
Vanish. It's gone. Yep. Bam, it's gone. It never existed, and people didn't notice. Or maybe people did notice, but they stamped out those voices. As much as things change, they stay the same.
And I didn't mean for you to go off on that.
No, that's okay. This is good.
But very, very few people. I didn't even know about this until you talked about it in the class in Corona that night. And I was like, whoa, you've got to be kidding me. So,
And, you
but
know, it's funny. I love it when there's people who consider themselves conspiracy factualists. They don't call
factualists.
themselves conspiracy theorists, but folks that really kind of get into that realm. And then I tell them this, and they go, what? And they've not heard of it. I get a kick out of it. It's like, dude, man, if anybody should know about it, it's you, you know. But
What are you
yeah,
trying to say, Doug? What are you trying to say?
yeah, yeah. I will admit I was shocked when you went, what? But this shows you the power of certain entities out there that are against this Constitution and against liberty and against our individuality and our exceptionalism as a country.
Well, I mean, let's just prognosticate here and think that if that 13th Amendment was in existence today, we wouldn't have think of the problems that we wouldn't be having with China.
Think about the problems we wouldn't be having with Europe and
Very
the UN.
right. Yeah. So anyway, on to the official 13th Amendment.
Well, yeah, the official. Even that's a term I don't know if even is appropriate, but
right.
yeah, the one that's in the book.
Right. The one that we consider the 13th Amendment today.
Yeah. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime. So in other words, those who've been convicted of a crime and go to prison, they can still be treated like slaves. So neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, in other words, due process, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, their jurisdiction meaning territories and things like that. Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Do you know when the war between the states officially ended?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I don't have the exact date, but I have month and year.
You know what? I'm embarrassed to say I don't. I know it was Appomattox, but I don't remember the exact.
May 1865.
Okay.
The 13th Amendment was ratified December 6th, 1865. It took just a matter of months.
Mm.
Congress doesn't normally work that quickly. So I think it was April actually, but May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Yeah, 8 months. It was April actually in 1865 that was over. So 8 months, they got it proposed, sent out to the states, ratified, and in the books. 8 months. Congress never works that quickly.
Ever.
I mean, it takes that long just to spend time in committee, much less anything else. That's the reason why, you know, you've heard of I told you my favorite Bible verse, right? For God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's in Luke. Now, anyway, I'm imagining people now breaking out the Bible. Where?
It's not there, folks. He's blaspheming today.
Is that the term? Yeah. So slavery is officially illegal, basically, thanks to this amendment. So now let me kill a thought that you may have had. No, Abraham Lincoln did not free the slaves, and no, the slaves were not freed by
the Emancipation
Proclamation. Well, we hear that all the time. Well, he was the president that freed the slaves. He didn't free them. He was president during all of that stuff going on. Who freed them was the Congress who proposed the amendment and the states who ratified it. Yeah. That's who officially freed the states, or the slaves. Now, understand something. December 1865, had all of the seceded states returned to the Union yet?
No, they had to completely reapply, and it took them a long time to get up. It took. I don't even remember how long it took because I'm not sharp on that part of history. But it
took a while.
It took years.
Right, and there was only a couple of them that had succeeded by the time the 3 amendments were ratified.
Mm-hmm.
These amendments got ratified using the Union states, basically,
Correct.
ratification.
Yeah, the quorum was the Union states only, and it was very easy for them to pass what they wanted because they were all basically in lockstep.
Yeah, and then once the states that had seceded were part of the Union again, their votes really were under duress anyway, because they were under military occupation. The military governors were controlling things. All of the politicians pretty much been thrown out of office. The people holding office were either carpetbaggers or recently freed slaves.
Right.
So yeah, it was quite a scene. And you got to remember, and I didn't get to this. I want to get back to this. When the states seceded, when those southern states seceded, number one, they seceded after Abraham won the election, but before he was inaugurated. That time period is when they all seceded. Number two, Abraham Lincoln was not on the ballot in the southern states. They didn't allow him to be. They made sure he wasn't. So when people ask me about California trying to keep Trump off the ballot, and that's, was that ever happened before? Yeah, it happened to a whole bunch of states way back in 1860. They kept off another hated Republican off the ballot. The Democrats did. But so now these states are slowly trying to get back into the Union. They're reapplying. They're trying to, bow down and make sure that the Republican dominated Congress lets them back in. And it's kind of funny because if you think about it, back then it was the Democrats that believed in state sovereignty, and the Republicans that believed in a strong, powerful federal government that could, crack the whip on the states that had seceded. Not that I mean anything by a crack the whip remark. But it was like, giving them the justice they deserve, making sure we punish them for their misbehavior. And so, but you got to think about it from the South's point of view. We got the northern states are not abiding by the Constitution. They're not abiding by the law. The federal government's not enforcing it. And then this guy becomes president with easily getting the majority of the electoral votes, and he wasn't even on the ballot in the South. We're out of here. We're gone, was the attitude of those states. And they had every right to do that because this is a written contract. And if you feel the Constitution is a written contract, it's a social contract. So if they felt like it was being breached, which it was, they had the right to remove themselves from that contract.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to tie into something else real quick when it comes to secession before we continue reading. And it comes from a question today. There is a meme, there's an email that's going around that says that the only state allowed to secede right now is Texas because they were a republic before they entered and because it's in their state constitution. That's basically how it goes. And while you're correct, Texas was a republic before they decided to become a state. And you are correct that the right of secession is still in their state constitution. They are not the only state allowed to secede. All states are allowed to secede.
Mm-hmm.
Every last one of them. Well, Doug, no, they made it illegal. No, they said that the courts made it illegal. Can courts make a law? No. So how can the courts make it illegal if the courts can't make a law? First of all. Second of all, we got to go back to the Constitution. 10th Amendment, real quick. 10th Amendment, it says that the power is not delegated to the United States, federal government, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people. So, meaning if it's listed as an authority to the federal government, they have the authority or power over it. If it's not, they don't. Secession is not even mentioned in the Constitution, which means the federal government not only has no authority over it, they have no opinion, they can't prevent it, nothing. States don't have to apply for it. The federal government has no authority whatsoever regarding secession. Because it's not prohibited to the states, every single state has the authority to secede if they so desire. This is not supposed to be a firm union. It is not a union. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not a national government where the states are nothing more than provinces. They are voluntary members of this union. And if they want to say, you know what, we're voluntarily leaving, they can. That is their authority. That is their right, because they got rights just like we do. And the states have the rights to leave. And if you don't like it, move to a state that's staying. If you like it, leave with the state. Now, that would create an interesting situation. And it's like I brought it up to the class today, California. Let's say California hypothetically seceded. What happens to the naval base in San Diego, Camp Pendleton, Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, the base there in Long Beach, the ammo dump in Norco, the ammo dump in Stockton, the base in Alameda? What happens to those federal lands? Because the state seceded. Who gets those lands? That's what happened at the start of the war between the states. South Carolina had seceded. Fort Sumter was an army base in the state of South Carolina. Federal government says, hey, that's our base. We're not leaving. And South Carolina saying, yeah, you are. We seceded. That's our property. Federal government's like, no, it's a federal base. The military owns it. The federal government owns it. We're not going anywhere. So the Confederates stormed the base, and that's what started the war between the states.
Do you know how many people died at Fort Sumter?
How many? I don't. Off the top of my head.
Zero.
Zero? Nobody died?
Nobody died. Only a horse.
Only a horse?
Mm-hmm. Which is quite remarkable considering that
how violent it was.
How many people died in the Civil War? But yeah, no, there were no casualties. And they didn't storm the base. Basically, what they did was they surrounded because Fort Sumter was essentially a man-made island in the middle of the harbor. And what they did was they surrounded it with batteries, and they fired. And I know that day, April 12th, they commenced it was about a 36-hour shelling of Fort Sumter. And they rose the white flag. Anderson rose the white flag, and that was it. But nobody died.
I didn't know that. That's a good piece of information. Interesting. All right. So now I wanted to lay all that groundwork so you understand what we're talking about here when we get into the 14th Amendment. That's the good news. You know what the bad news is? We're out of time.
Yeah.
So next week, 14th Amendment. Like 2 minutes, minute and a half.
But see, this is this is really interesting stuff. I mean, we look at how the Revolutionary War impacted us in the sense from the Constitution, but where the Constitution really started to get interesting was post Civil War. Mm-hmm. That's when you had like I don't want to say evil forces, but that's when you had deep state forces that had finally got their hooks inside of the country, because the people who the founding fathers who were here, they made sure that there was a period of time where they made sure nobody could get in here and get anything. They couldn't get their hooks inside. I mean, there was the arguments between Hamilton for the banking and whatnot, and Jackson kind of set that aside. But until the Civil War happened, until the United States had to borrow a bunch of money from Europe to fund that war, there was really
we had separated ourselves from Europe in 1836 when the Second Bank of the United States had been killed. This charter never renewed, and so it'd been a good 25 years before the start of that war, or no, yeah, about 25 years, in which we had nothing to do with Europe, and we were outside of Europe. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have any influence on us.
We traded with Europe. In fact,
we traded with them, but
if you really want to go back,
it was our currency.
But if you really want to go back to what the Emancipation Proclamation was, the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't a thing to free the slaves.
No, it was to get Europe out of the war.
It was to keep Europe from coming into the war on the side of the South, because the prevailing sentiment in Europe was anti-slavery. And so if the North had the anti-slavery sentiment, especially with the Emancipation Proclamation, the navies of the Europe would not come in and
because
opened
the
up.
people start complaining. You're siding with who in that war? Pro-slavery? What's going on? So the pressure of the people. Yeah, that's what the Emancipation Proclamation was all about. I didn't get to it because we really didn't have the time, but thank you for bringing it up. I will say this as our closing thought, because I really do got to go, because I can't run late even a little bit, because I've got two people riding with me tonight to the class, and they said they'd be at my door at 4, and it's 4:01 right now, my time. Is this, if you ever watch the National Treasure movies with Nicolas Cage, and I love those movies. They're so much fun. The second one, and in both of them, there is a scene where they get American history correct. I can't remember the first one off the top of my head, but the second one, Ben Gates, the character that Nicolas Cage plays, says, before the Civil War, it was the United States are, and after it became the United States is.
Right.
My jaw dropped so rapidly. I was surprised everybody in the theater didn't hear the shatter of the bone on the concrete, because it was like, whoa, not only do they get it right, they've gotten it right twice, and that's part of the reason I enjoy those movies, aside from the fact that I'm a big fan of John Voight, which my parents had a chance to meet one time in Israel. That's a different story. United States are, United States is.
Right.
United States are is plural. It was a plurality. A bunch of states that had come together in a plural form as a part of this union, a voluntary union. Or you have the United States is a national system in which the states are really not much more than
a
provinces.
Singular entity. Now,
firm union.
This is good, and I know you got to go, but this is going to touch on a little bit of third rail stuff. But Dr. Pepper again, but that's
hey,
that's
Dr.
where
Day keeps the. Never mind.
That's where some people contend the 1871 Constitution comes into being, because it is now a single entity. But that's a topic of conversation for another day. We are going to end it there so that Doug can get on the road and not be late. Guys, thank you for being here today. I hope you guys learned something, and it's always fun for Doug and I. And I hope you see that we entertain each other as much as we try to entertain you.
Well, I want to entertain. I want you to get your information. I want you to learn. I want you to be informed. But I don't want to give it to you in such a boring manner that you're like, oh, it's a lecture.
And 100%. And see, I'm of the opinion that history is fascinating, but history has to be told from the perspective of making it like come alive. And most history professors are the bookworms, and they're monotone. And everybody who hates history had a history professor who just, was just boring. And
Bueller.
Yeah, exactly.
Bueller.
Exactly.
Bueller. Yeah, did you love that? Okay, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, I've been getting I actually had a couple of people get a hold of me on my Reagan address, which I don't typically put out there, but somehow they got it. And that's okay. That's okay. I'm not upset. And they said, hey man, I'm just so glad I found the new link for the YouTube page. Hey, share it, put it out there. Let people know this is going on. Let people know. Let's get as many people in here in this room as possible, number one. And number two, if you're in Southern California, go to one of my websites, either politicalpistachio.com or douglasvgibbs.com, or you go to the constitutionassociation.com for that matter, because on September 18th, we have an event for the Constitution Association in Murrieta, California, 5 o'clock, $59 for a ticket. And I want you there. And limited seating though. So if you're going to go, if you're in Southern California, you want to go to my websites. At the very top of the websites, there's a link to the Eventbrite page. I want to see you there. All right.
On that note, so have a great night, guys. We'll see you next week.
All right. Stay constitutional.